Suffering the pleasure of this divine grace, and the Lordship Sri Radha Krishna, Gauranga Jagannatha Bhajamala Dev, will chant the transcendental bhajan Jadabharata. How many of you know who wrote Jadabharata? Yeah. Everybody get that? Jaya Hare His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, ISKCON DVT Founder, Acharya His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, Ananta Koti Vaishnava Ki Jai, Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai, Prem Sako Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda, Sri Advaita Sri Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaur Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai, Sri Radha Krishna Gopinath Shyamasundar Radhakanti Govardhan Ki Jai, Srimati Tulsi Devi Bhakti Devi Vrindamai Ki Jai, Sri Ganga Yamuna Saraswati Ki Jai, Sri Navadvitam Sri Mayapurdam Ki Jai, Sri Jagannath Pur Nilachala Kshetra Ki Jai, Sri Mathuradam Sri Vrindavadam Ki Jai, Sri Holy Name Mahamantra Ki Jai, Sri Nam Sankirtan Ki Jai, Sri Sacramento Yatra Ki Jai, Gaur Pranandi Hari Hari Bol. All glories, all glories, all glories to the assembled devotees. All glories, all glories, all glories to the lotus feet of Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. So I had asked Sajid Prema whether anybody had given you a report from our AGM, our annual general meeting, which is the GBC meeting in Mayapur, and she said no. So I'm going to do my little talk tonight in 3 parts. One part is I'm going to give you a little overview of the meeting, and the second part we'll discuss a little bit about Sadhu Sangha, Association of Devotees, and the third part we'll have some Srila Prabhupada talk. The memories of Srila Prabhupada. So that will be the 3 parts of the little discussion tonight. So every year, prior to Gaur Purnim, the entire GBC body meets in Mayapur. So before I go further with this part, is anybody in this room not knowing what it means when I say GBC? Everybody knows what the GBC is? General? Got it?
Governing body.
Yeah. So then actually now there's 2 meetings. There's a second midterm meeting which happens in October, and that's in various places. Generally Bombay, but other places. And this year the other place will be Tirupati. Will be our second time there. Wonderful place to have a meeting, I have to say. Oh my God, it's very amazing. If you have the opportunity to visit our ISKCON Center in Tirupati, don't hesitate. So the body, of which there are about 34 GBC members. There's also a body of devotees called GBC devotees. So they are kind of like empowered secretaries, and they have a lot to do with making sure the GBC meeting runs smoothly, and that they review all the proposals that people hand in and decide, whether they actually meet the criteria for a GBC proposal. And then sometimes they have to find out what the person means who submitted it, what is the meaning and the intention of the proposal. And so by the time it comes to the GBC members, we don't have to go back and forth. We can discuss the merits of the proposal or not. So they're also present. And each year there's a set of officers. Just you need someone to run the meeting and keep things going in between meetings, because things happen in between meetings too. It's not the only time there's any action is on the meetings, during the meetings. So the way it is that a new person is added every year to the roster of chairpersons. So there's the first chair, the vice chair, and the second vice chair. So like 3. And they kind of move up each year. So then the one that just gets at it. He moves up to vice, and then he becomes the chairperson, and the chairperson then retires after his year. As the chairperson, he's still on the GBC. So last year, the chairperson was Tamahar Prabhu, vice chair was Anuttama, and Prabhu was the second vice chair. So this year, the chairperson is Anuttama Prabhu, who you may know from the communications, ISKCON communications. And then the vice chair is Prabhu, who hails from the United Kingdom. Specifically, he's Irish. And the second vice chair is His Grace Sesha Prabhu, who is in Malati. So that is the new officers this year. And then this year, there was a little history. His Grace Ravinda Swarup resigned after 29 years of service, not from ISKCON, but from the GBC service. And he has become a GBC emeritus. So that means that, we have a few emeritus. Giriraj Swami is emeritus, for example. So the persons who are emeritus, they can attend a meeting if they want, and they'll certainly be consulted on very serious issues, but they don't have to attend meetings, and they also don't vote. So that was, his resignation was accepted, and a very nice letter was offered to him of appreciation. So some of the topics that were discussed this year, again, this is like kind of being concise, and not any necessarily order that they were discussed, but more or less. So one of the big topics is the 50th anniversary of ISKCON. That is happening. Does anybody know which year? 1916. Yeah. So, considering we're about halfway into 2016, and nobody said anything like that. Hello, are you listening? So, we're halfway into 14, so it's a year and a half from now. And in most situations, 50 is a benchmark, it's a milestone. 50 years old, you look at it's half a century. Right? So we're trying to have a wonderful worldwide celebration in terms of each and every center, each and every yatra, each and every group taking it upon themselves to do something wonderful to bring recognition to ISKCON's existence in their locality or beyond. So what is suggested that each temple or group, like we have a group here, has appoint one person, or one person can volunteer to be a coordinator for your group in your area. And there are some, at this point there have been different, we can call brainstorming sessions, coming up with different ideas what people can do, what centers can do to try to create awareness for ISKCON, specifically for the broader public, but also among devotees. Sometimes we get a little complacent. So I'm not sure. Normally, I would say check with your GBC. I'm not sure, but you could probably check with Vaisheshika. He's aware of what's going on in this way, and he can give you the particular dates and information, and hopefully you'll feel kind of enlivened and want to take part in this and do something here in Sacramento. And it's not like it happens only in one day. We're taking the whole year. Actually, some places are starting next year. So throughout 2016, you can either have one Grand Slam event or have many different events, you see, but each one designed to bring attention and awareness to the wonderful activities of the Hare Krishna movement. One of the other initiatives that was agreed upon was a universal increase in book distribution. Now, North America kind of got on that bandwagon about 3 years ago, sorry. Yeah, we're into the third year. When we realized we could be doing a whole lot better in terms of the number of books that are being distributed. So the first year we agreed, okay, we're going to try to do 20% more. And everybody was thinking, hope we can do it. But actually by the wonderful coordination of all the devotees together throughout North America, it happened. And then they said, well, let's do it again. So that was 20% on top of 20%, and people were kind of, well, I hope we can do it. But actually, they did it. They even went over the mark. So this year, we're not putting the same 20%, but we are putting at least a minimum 10% increase from last year. When we say increase, we're referring to the previous year. And everybody seems, among the North American leaders, seems confident that this is something we can do. But not only is it just to have this 10% increase, they are having a particular emphasis on distributing whole sets of Srimad Bhagavatam and whole sets of Chaitanya Chaitamitra. In other words, big blocks of mercy. And some devotees, I'm sure Seshika has mentioned this to you, how they distribute full sets to people and they bring them into their houses and actually install the Srimad Bhagavatam in the receiver's house. So they're making a little video about this so that others, other devotees can, do the same thing. And Prabhupada Swami has found it to be very effective. He's very enthusiastic about these Bhagavatam installations. So something to think about. And the people who purchase them are people from all walks of life and all cultural backgrounds. So it's not like something only people from India will buy or only Hindus will buy. We've had Muslim people, we've had Catholic people, we've had Native American people and Hispanic people. Because why? Universal knowledge intended to uplift mankind. So that's a little on the book distribution. And then there was a new division, it's not a ministry, but it's part of the emerging reorganization of our society, where there are different departments that are going to be they are like global departments. So one of the new global departments is called the Division of Legal, Accounting, Regulatory Compliance. So this may sound like pretty intense, like what does that have to do with chanting Hare Krishna? But please consider that Srila Prabhupada kept his house, his offices in very good shape. He was very concerned about the welfare and the status of his temples. And all of these things, legalities, accounting, making sure that you're, even if you have a nonprofit, that you're compliant with local, state, and federal laws, etc. He saw to that, and he wanted us to be compliant also. And sometimes the mood is, we don't need to bother with this stuff. We're above this because we're devotees, and Krishna isn't, he's not up there keeping books. But I can tell you that from personal experience, Prabhupada was so concerned with the details of making sure the temples were in good shape. And in our early days, San Francisco, you've heard about that mantra rock dance that we put on to raise money for the new temple, our little storefront. And it was kind of it was a part of the ISKCON history and legend. And the next day, Prabhupada called in Shamsundar. He said, so, how much was collected? And then he told Shamsundar to sit down, and he taught him how to keep books, how to keep accounting. So he wanted us to keep our business in order. And we have had unfortunate experiences with just simple things. People forgot to file, in some cases you have to make yearly filings on certain papers or documents, in some cases every 5 years. And, somebody overlooks doing it, and the next thing you know, you get a notice in the mail saying, well, your corporation is being disbanded because you didn't file your continuance papers or something. So it's actually a very serious part of devotional service to take care of these activities. One of the other new things that the GBC discussed and all agreed upon practically unanimously is called the ISKCON Disciples Course. Has anybody here heard of that? One person. Okay. Most of this stuff, by the way, you can look up online. The minutes, you can look up online on Jadabharata. There's also an official ISKCON website that you can find. You'll see the minute. You can see the minutes from going back quite a number of years, actually. Not the minutes, but the resolutions that come out of the meetings. So the ISKCON Disciples Course will become fully effective on Janmashtami of next year, 2015. And at that time, it will become mandatory for all devotees who are accepting first or second initiation to take this course, which means that the prospective guru will not be able to initiate you if you have not taken the course. And it is available online, but ideally, you would go in maybe with groups of 10 to 15 people and have an actual person there teaching you. And it goes over all practical aspects, what it means to be a disciple, what is the obligations of a disciple, and what can a disciple expect from the guru, from ISKCON, and we have heard from people who have taken this course, because in order to establish the course, they had to make a curriculum and then test run it, and now it's being taught, and the response is overwhelmingly, unanimously positive. So, ISKCON Disciples Course. Then, let me get back to one. There was a wonderful accomplishment called Founder Acharya, Srila Prabhupada Founder Acharya, which is a book by Ravindra Swarup for the Prabhupada's position, establishing Srila Prabhupada's position in a recognizable way that everyone can understand how Srila Prabhupada relates to each and every person, or how we relate to Srila Prabhupada, each and every person in ISKCON. What is his position? And of course, we hear ISKCON Founder Acharya. What is the meaning of that? So Ravindra Swarup carefully and systematically researched this, and wonderful book, and that's at won't remember this probably, but I'm going to say it anyway, www.founderacharya, that's all one word, www.founderacharya.com, and it's a free download, and very much, it's quite scholarly in presentation, and it's also very philosophical, but I think it's something that is important to read to gain a deeper understanding of Srila Prabhupada's position. There was a devotee healthcare guideline, which is encouraging all ISKCON entities to ensure that there's essential medical and dental expenses for residents. And of course, this won't really affect your group because nobody lives here and you don't have dependents. But in the future, we hope that you will have a full-fledged temple, and this would be something you would, if you have full-time members, then it would be something you would want to know that the administrations are being asked to make sure that there's medical coverage for at least essential medical needs for the members who are fully dependent. Then there was a really wonderful and interesting report that was co-presented by Radhanath Swami, Shivaram Swami, and His Grace Tukaram from down on Laguna Beach. Does anybody here know Tukaram Prabhu? Yeah. So you know that he can be very, first of all, he's got a big brain, and he really researches things, and he can be very passionate about something that he feels strongly about. So in January, he had made a presentation to our group, the North American Leadership Group, and the title was called Ahimsa Milk. Now, you're not going to find ahimsa milk anywhere in the Vedas because basically it's in modern terminology. But there's a lot of words we use nowadays that you're not going to find even in older dictionaries because they're words of the time. So ahimsa milk is what it sounds. It's cruelty-free milk. In other words, it's from cows who are fully protected. And these cows will never be sent to a slaughterhouse. So they gave us some very interesting information that many of us weren't aware of. And we're encouraging devotees to find ways, if possible, to connect with dairies that are providing milk from protected cows, and realizing this is not going to be something very easily done immediately. Encouraging devotees and communities of devotees to think about getting their own cows, getting some land, and having. And I can tell you one community in Lawrence, Kansas. They have done this for years now. That they're a group of devotees. They don't have a physical temple. They meet in each other's homes, but they did purchase land, and they keep cows in the land, and the land has housing, and they collectively pay to maintain the land, to maintain the family who is there, who takes care of the cows, and from the cows they're getting milk, and then this family makes yogurt, cheese, different types of cheeses. The lady Satyamata has become really expert at that, and of course paneer and other products. So they don't sell them outside their community because it's, they're not into it for production. It's part of their, community service and services through the Prabhupada. But it shows that what you can do. They don't have, they don't have a big infrastructure. They had a desire to protect cows and have pure milk from protected cows. So they collectively made this arrangement. So some of the information that was a little startling was that the commercial dairy industry is a big supporter of the slaughterhouses. You don't think of the innocent little cows giving milk as being members of the slaughterhouse, but actually within 3 to 5 years, every dairy cow will be in a slaughterhouse, for a commercial dairy cow. And that's because their milk productivity decreases. So everything is by numbers there. It's not about taking care of this cow, it's about how much I can squeeze out of this cow. And when the number falls below the production level that creates money, enough money to keep profit, then the cow is sent off for slaughter. So that was a very harsh reality too. Then you realize that even all these wonderful dairy products are coming with a price. So again, it's not something that can be immediately maybe digested or immediately acted upon. But when I speak about this, I do encourage devotees to get together and discuss what's going on and see if maybe in the future you might be able to find a solution for your particular group. Then there was three how do we say, Kirtan resolutions. So these are effective immediately, and basically many senior devotees, myself included, have been very uncomfortable with the kirtans that are going on currently, because they are direct deviations from what we were taught by Srila Prabhupada. The deviations are mostly in alterations to the pattern of the Hare Krishna Mahamantra, and adding and concocting kirtans, and adding kirtans that weren't approved by Srila Prabhupada, or weren't introduced by Srila Prabhupada or the previous acharyas. So, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but this is something you can look up and you should become familiar with. So I'll start with the easy one. One was sound systems. In many places you go, the sound system is unbearably loud. Not only is the sound system unbearably loud, the person behind the mic thinks they have to shout. I'm not going to do it because they're shouting into the mic. You know, like you have a mic so you can speak and everyone can hear it, but they're shouting. And it's like, oh my God, it's, painful to the ears. And then continue that through the kirtans. And I have seen children, like little kids, put their hands over their ears, and if a kid does that, a baby, a little kid, it's because of pain. It's not because they don't want to hear the holy name. It's because of the sound level. Smart parents who bring their kids to temples that can't control sound levels now buy protective hearing aids, for their kids, as well as themselves. But you see little kids with these things on. It's actually, you're damaging the hearing of your children, So we're asking temples, not only the children, but practically many of the older devotees, like I have plastic in both ears because the sound levels of, years of blasting sound. So everyone's, keep the sound clear, sweet, and attractive. Avoid overly loud, distorted, and painful. And then you can, everybody has a smartphone nowadays, so you can download a free app, and that app will register the decibel levels. And 8.5 dBA is considered too loud. If it hits that point and it keeps going on, you can have spikes, but if it's like consistently loud, that's when it's damaging, and then you want to reduce the volume. So that's, why do we have to do that? Because people weren't, respecting the sound levels. And we're having devotees who are prematurely deaf. So now, getting into the guidelines that are more applicable to the kirtan. The first resolution was the Hare Krishna Mahamantra should always be the primary mantra in all ISKCON kirtans. This is not referring to bhajans. If you're singing bhajans, of course we should hope you're singing bona fide bhajans, but we're speaking about kirtans. So, in other words, you start the kirtans with Krishna Chaitanya and Prabhupada's pranams, and you have your kirtan. But what really happens sometimes now, you'll get less than 5 minutes of the Hare Krishna kirtan, and somebody goes off chanting they'll have Jaya this, Jaya that, so many other things, or they start doing the Hare Bols, on and on and on and on and on. Actually, Srila Prabhupada he taught us about Hare Bol. He was telling us something. He goes, and you can say Hare Bol, and then he said, you say. So we all said Hare Bol. We know what you're saying, Hare Bol. And he goes, Hare Bol is like shortcut to Hare Krishna. So you can say sometimes, but he never chanted a prolonged, kirtan of Hare Bol. In fact, he told us about a deviant sect of Sahajiyas who only chant. They're called the Hare Bols, and it's all they chant, and it's not bona fide, So the main body of the kirtan should be the Hare Krishna Mahamantra. You say a few Hare Bols, that's good. You say a few Jai Prabhupada, that's very good, But that we shouldn't start chanting other mantras or other names. The Hare Krishna Maha Mantra is the prime benediction for humanity at large in this day and age, and we should, as much as we can, chant it and promote it as others. Then, one of the misunderstood ones, but equally important, were the guideline for chanting the names of Radharani. Srila Prabhupada never introduced chanting the names of Radharani or Radhe Radhe, etc. In fact, when we first went to India with him, and we were the first group that went, we noticed everybody was saying Jai Radhe, Jai Radhe, and we asked Prabhupada about that. He said, yes, they chant Jai Radhe. He says, but we say Hare Krishna. The chanting is like making a kirtan of Radha's names. You'll hear this Radhe, 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 or Jai, Jai, Shri Radhe, on and on and on. It was not introduced to us by Srila Prabhupada, in other words, you will find it introduced by the previous acharyas. So why are we doing it? Have we become this ultra, advanced group of people? Don't think so. So, in Radhastami, and Prabhupada says there's nothing wrong. You say, to chant Radharani's name, but we're talking about making a prolonged kirtan chanting. And obviously, on Radhastami, you're going to want to chant 2 or 3. You want to say Radharani's names, but not that Radharani's name replaces Hare Krishna. And then the third one, which might not have hit you, maybe you all are innocent of this one, but they started these gender-based kirtans. Ladies only. And they have the ladies, hey, this man, this man. And they go, men only. So it's like, for those of us who are disciples, what is this? It's like calling attention to the body when we're trying to disassociate ourselves from attention to the body. And then one of the other ones they started doing, the men would go, Radhe, Radhe, and the women would go, Sham. And we've heard that sometimes they do that one. So now the GBC had to officially alert people that, really this isn't bona fide. Now we're not saying you can't chant Radharani's names ever, but we're putting it into perspective under the teachings of Srila Prabhupada and the previous acharyas. So that's just like a little brief overview. Like I said, you can look up on Jadabharata.com, or you can look on the ISKCON official site. I just saw it yesterday for the first time, actually. But the reports are there, and it's good to be familiar with what is going on in ISKCON. So, I want to speak for a little bit about the importance of devotee association, sadhusanga, and what the value of that can be. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, in the 5th canto, there is the story of Jadabharata and King Rahugana. And is everybody familiar with that story? Should I give a brief rundown? Yeah, so, well, we know that Jadabharata was appearing, his history. He had been a really big sadhu in the forest. And then, living alone in seclusion, the little deer pregnant deer jumped over a stream being chased by a lion, or a tiger, some forest animal. And midstream, she actually gave birth out of fear. She kept going, and the baby was, there. So he rescued this baby deer. And I don't know how many of you have seen baby deers. They're really small and they're really cute. A few years ago in New Vrindavan, Radha Swami had given a dissertation on this exact pastime. And right at the end of the class, somebody came and said to me, "Have you seen the baby deer?" What? There's a baby deer in the hallway. So I went out to look, and I'm thinking deer, so I'm thinking, baby or not, sign of a sizable animal. I'm looking, I couldn't see anything. and we were pointing down, and there was this little tiny thing. It was so little. I have a picture of it next to somebody's boot. The boot is bigger than the baby deer. So of course you're just like, oh my God, it's so cute, and we have to save it and protect it, you know. So I mean, I could really relate to this story, you know. And then you're doing it, and the little deer's getting bigger, and you're attached to it. It gets attached to you. You know, this little deer would come up into the temple. You know, people would leave things on the hundi. Besides putting money in the hundi, they would put fruits and stuff. And the little deer would come up and take a piece of fruit and look at the deities. And you know, he'd come to our every day. Would come to my office and the different offices. And then when he got even a little bigger, he'd go down to the apartments and go outside the doors like he was doing Mataji, you know. I mean, it's so cute, right? So, but here was a sage. It dedicated his life to self-realization. And he got attracted to this little deer to the point where he was forgetting the process of self-realization. Instead of, you know, Krishna conscious, he was becoming very deer conscious. So, we were saved from that because what happened in our case, our cute little deer one day started attacking people. Standing up on her hind legs and crashing down with her feet. And I mean, they have sharp hooves. And she was like targeting certain people. If you've been to New Vrindavan and you know Jadabharata, saintly soul, he's in a wheelchair, she'd go out, she'd attack him. She'd wait outside my cabin, and my assistant was coming out, she'd knock her to the ground. So it was becoming an attacking guest. And it was, you know, these sharp little things. She'd knock you down and she'd crack on your back. It, you know, left marks. So we had to, well, first we took her down the road, and, you know, she got back before the driver in the van got back. Then we took her further down the road, but the next day she was back. So between, you know, New Vrindavan's in the Panhandle, and just 20 miles over is Ohio, and there's a river in between, so we took her across the river. So we didn't, you know, we got attached, but Krishna kind of cut it. But Jadabharata, he got so attached that he was thinking of that little deer, and he kind of lost his drive for self-realization. But because he was actually a great saint person, in his next life, although he had become a deer, he was given the benediction that he would remember fully his previous life. He would have to take birth once as a deer, and then he would come back. Now he is Jadabharata. And this time he was very careful with himself, and he would just act as if he was dumb. Dumb meaning like, not dumb as in you don't speak. And he was standing out in the field. They said sometimes his brothers were like, they would taunt him, tease, you know how kids will tease each other. So he would stand in the field and flap his arms, and they'd just use him like a scarecrow to keep the birds and other beasts out from the fields. And he was fine, he didn't mind. Because that way he could be fully immersed in thinking about Krishna, and he wasn't getting distracted by all these worldly things. But one day along came the king, this man, and they needed a stout, strong guy to help carry the palanquin. And there was Jadabharata, he was a strong guy, so they enlisted him. And if you'll remember what happened, he was not a very good palanquin carrier because he kept kind of, you know, dancing around. But he wasn't really dancing. As a devotee, he couldn't bear to hurt any other living entity. And he was seeing the ants on the ground. So he was trying to avoid stepping on the ants. But because of that, the way he was moving in an unsteady way. So, at that point, the king, who was King Rahugana, he was very angry. And, you know, he got angry with this this person and said, you're this big stout guy, but actually you can't do this. And he was very angry with him. And, he was a good king generally, but because he was a king, he had certain qualities. And he's a leader, you have to have a certain demeanor, you have to present yourself in a certain way. And because of that, he got a little bit proud of himself. I'm the king, and, so I'm the king and you're not, and it was kind of a mood. But he was identifying with the role of a king. And he got on Jadabharata's case. And he said, you're not doing this right. Because according to the king's understanding, he wasn't doing it right. But according to Jadabharata, he was doing it right because he wasn't harming the ants. So, this is the nature of a Vaishnava. Vaishnava is compassionate, he's careful, they're soft-hearted, and he's seeing the soul within all living entities, including these little ants. I don't want to get off on the ants, but I have to say, I have to think of this story a lot because in my residence in New Vrindavan, somehow or other, there's in the house, ants come like anything, to the point that when I'm eating, they're on my arms and my plates, and I'm like, I don't even know if I'm a vegetarian anymore. And these ants are everywhere. And I brush my teeth, and they're all over. I'm always thinking, just think of Jadabharata, because anyway, trying to be tolerant. So the king was very annoyed, and he started to insult him. You look strong and you're stout, but you're just not doing your service nicely. You look healthy, but you can't even carry this palanquin properly. And Jadabharata turns around in a very calm way, matter-of-fact way, says, actually, you're not talking about me. You're talking about my body. But that body's not actually me. Actually, you think you're the king, but you're not a king. That's just the role you're playing. Actually, it's just in one life. In one life, I may be a king, and you may be the palanquin carrier. You may be carrying my palanquin. So he started to systematically enlighten him on the difference between the body and the soul, the difference between the individual person and the body that one inhabits. And at first he wasn't prepared to hear this, but due to the mercy and the compassion of Jadabharata, who was very tolerant, he was so tolerant, he really wanted to give transcendental knowledge to this person. So he started to hear, and he began listening very carefully. And then he realized that this was not an ordinary person. He had the realization it's, this person who he just saw as some low-class individual was an extraordinary living entity. So he got down off his palanquin and he made his obeisances. And he wanted to know, who are you? Who are you? And Jadabharata began to explain more in the practical philosophy and the goal of life. And, just imagine if Jadabharata had just been indifferent to the king's criticism and became offended, and didn't take the time and the tolerance to enlighten him. He could have been ill, he just could have been indifferent. And what if the king had just become, somehow or other so affected that he had done something he couldn't even, people do that, kill him or something. But somehow or other, because of the overwhelming tolerant mood of Jadabharata, the king was affected. And this is the nature of a great soul. Srila Prabhupada explains that the quality of a great soul is that they can tolerate circumstances, no matter how difficult they may be. And of course that tolerance is beyond the level of what we probably would understand as tolerance. So usually when you approach a saintly person for knowledge or for understanding or for service, you kind of have to approach in a humble way. And in this case, Ravana was not actually approaching Jadabharata. He was actually trying to command him and use him as his servant. That's how he saw him. But because of the tolerance of Jadabharata, he got through that moment. And Jadabharata was tolerating all the negativity just to save that king and enlighten him in transcendental knowledge. So exhibiting the symptoms and qualities of great soul. So he was friendly, he was merciful, and very, very tolerant. Many of you here are parents, so you have the opportunity of experiencing and practicing tolerance. It's one of the beneficial byproducts of being a parent. So, Prabhupada gives some insight into the nature of a great soul and in relationship to a disciple. He puts this in the Purport, and he says that the arguments of a great soul or a pure devotee are so convincing and spiritually powerful that they go directly to the heart of even a dull-headed person and can help that person understand. So, understand spiritual knowledge. So what is this like dull-headedness? Sometimes you hear Prabhupada using this comment, dull-headed. So it means continuous attachment to material sense gratification, or continuous endeavor to find happiness through material activities, or trying to find material solutions for spiritual problems. So that's dull-headedness. One time on a morning walk, the topic came up about how there's no happiness in the material world. So sometimes when we hear something that we know is a fact, but we haven't quite realized it, or we accept it, but we haven't realized it. Sometimes we kind of refrain from trying to hear it. So you hear that there is no happiness in the material world, and immediately you kind of shut down. Oh no, you hear that again, But there's a basis, So one of the devotees on a morning walk was questioning Srila Prabhupada about this statement that there is no happiness in the material world, because it says in the Shastra that the mode of goodness is characterized by happiness. Right? This is a fact. What's one of the qualities of mode of goodness is happiness. So Prabhupada said yes, and it says that in the Shastra. So Prabhupada said yes, but it's also characterized by knowledge. Mode of goodness is characterized by knowledge. And that knowledge tells you there is no happiness in the material world. So that's the understanding of the knowledge principle, and the pure devotee is constantly working on removing this dull-headedness through the stream of transcendental knowledge. And Srila Prabhupada explains that unless one convinced within their heart and their minds, if we're not convinced, then it's just theory that there's no happiness in this material world. So if we're not convinced deep within, it means our spiritual life has not yet begun. So we can say we're in the practicing stage in the actual process of spiritual life. So sometimes we may say, well, that's just I'm not getting anywhere, right? But then, there's different check marks you can look. We call it spiritual progress check marks. So this is one of them, How convinced are we about the fact that there is no happiness to be found in this material world? Our first reaction is, sometimes it's, yeah, that's true, but then it's like, sometimes we get this negative reading, well, this is really negative, But what is negative about the truth? It doesn't mean you have to be an unhappy person. It doesn't mean you have to be a morose person. But you just understand this is the fact of the material world. And if we don't understand it, then our spiritual life is being put on hold. So even if we have some attachment to material life, which, we obviously do, we can have the real understanding and accept the truth. And the antidote is the association of great souls. It's just like the king was an illusion, that he was the king. But by the association of great souls, that's right, his illusion was dispelled. He surrendered to him, he became his disciple. Just this association. So, this association, this sadhusanga, is also part of the remedy to help us get through our dull-headedness. And the association of great souls by hearing and chanting the glories of the Lord and their association is described as nectar for the ears, and it purifies the heart, and it gives one attachment to the process of devotional service. So unless we have some attachment to the process of devotional service, it's also very difficult to make progress. We have to develop a little attachment, push ourselves a little beyond the, okay, this is my duty stage, until we actually have some feeling stage. The Sutta Goswami is explaining in the first canto that in addition, service to the pure devotee is the best service of all. And it's by that service one gets awarded with the taste for chanting and hearing and attraction for the glories of the Lord. So we want to become so attracted to the hearing and the chanting, the glories of the Lord, that we don't have the opportunity. We want to actually have that attraction to hear and chant. And if we want to feel like if I don't have that opportunity, then we'll actually feel disturbed by it. So if we're not absorbed in the mood of trying to hear and chant the glories of the Lord, then we want to feel like we don't find happiness that we're really looking for, that this short-term happiness is really what it is, a relief from, a momentary relief. But the real happiness is through the connection of the association with the Lord and His devotees. So we know that nice verse in the Bhagavad Gita where Krishna says, Mataji that the real association of the devotee is that you have to surrender to that person, to that advanced person, and hear from them submissively and serve them. So in the Chaitanya it is saying that the real association is to develop eager, enthusiastic mentality to hear the glories of the Lord spoken by the pure devotees. So then that's another aspect, is to develop this enthusiastic mentality. And that comes with the association of devotees. So then there's a nice verse that sadhusanga, sarva shastri, jaya lava matra sadhu, sarva sangi sarva siddhikaya. So in that verse, there's this lava mantra. So Prabhupada describes this lava mantra as being, he gives it a designate, it says 1/11th of a second. Just like we say the spirit soul is 1/10,000th of the tip of the hair, so this lava mantra is 1/11th of a second. So the mood of hearing great souls as described in this verse, spoken by Sri Krishna Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself, he uses that word, lava matra, and it means that that 1/11th second of association with a pure devotee, one's heart can actually become purified. So then we may think, well, I've been doing that. I've had a lot of matras, I've had a lot of this lava matras, so where's my purified heart? So somebody asked that, Prabhupada, we've been associating with you so much, and yet we haven't reached this stage, of bhakti. What's going on? So Prabhupada replied, very nice reply, very instructive. When the wood is wet, it doesn't light. I don't know, if any of you have ever been camping and you have to make a fire, or maybe, during one of the fire ceremonies, somebody brought some wood that was damp and you just couldn't get it to burn, because it's wet. It says, but when the wood is dry, as soon as it comes in contact with the fire, what happens? It immediately catches fire. So that means if we're not feeling this attraction to hear, if we're not feeling the purification, we can understand we're still in the wet wood stage. So how do you dry wet wood out? You put it in the sun, but you keep it out of the wet. So this means we have to check ourselves. Maybe I'm putting a little too much time in association with material energy, maybe I'm not properly associating with devotees, maybe I'm, taking more time on YouTube and Facebook than I am on, BBag and, so we can check ourselves. So the drying of the wood is a constant hearing in association with pure devotees, and then that will gradually purify one's consciousness. So in the Padma Purana is deciding how to access the quality of hearing and to maximize your hearing, because we know this mind is going all over the place, right? So there are given in the Padma Purana four principles of effective hearing. So now you have people nowadays writing all kinds of books about, principles of effective management or leadership, etc. Everything actually has its roots and essence in the Vedic literature. So the four principles of effective hearing, the first one is faith. Faith in the speaker. So if one has doubts about the speaker, providing the speaker is speaking from the parampara, there should be no doubts. But if one has doubts, then one won't be able to assimilate what is being said. So, first one is to have faith, because if you don't, then full absorption can't take place. So the second one is humility. And in other words, that one has to have a demeanor of accepting what is being said. That even though I may be so learned, I'm not learned, so I don't have that problem, but sometimes people, I'm so learned, why should I listen to this person? But in that mood, one cannot hear properly. It's a barrier to hearing, so in order to hear properly, one has to be humble. What did Lord Chaitanya say? My guru said, that in front of my guru, I'm just a fool. I'm just a fool. The third is destroying the faults in the mind. So then to know what are these faults in the mind? So the faults in the mind are, this control. The mind is going here and there. And, we find this a lot when we're chanting our rounds, right? Hare, Krishna, Hare, Rama, and in between the Hare Krishnas and the Hare Ramas, we're all over the planet. So we know that the mind is like this. So we have to be very astute about pulling the mind back to center. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati says that we should not associate with non-devotees. Your mind is a non-devotee, so you should not associate with it. You should preach to your mind and make your mind a devotee. So, to destroy the faults of the mind means to constantly bring the mind back to the lotus feet of the Lord, or to the topic that is being discussed. And the fourth principle for effective hearing, that if one follows the first three, faith, humility, and constantly bringing the mind back to, then it said that one or two things or both. So either this or that or both may happen. So the first thing is that one gets realization of the subject matter that is being discussed. And the second one is one may start to have questions about the topic that's being discussed. So this is inquiry. That's very good. One should, questions should be provoked. And sometimes both things. You get realizations and you also get questions. So these are principles, are proponents of attentive hearing. And the more we concentrate on what is being said, then the more deeper we can go into the devotional mood. And the mind becomes more fixed, more steady. So Jadabharata, he pulled out all of King Ravana's attachments. And King Ravana, he appreciated this, and he expressed it. He completely destroyed all my arguments, because he was, it's natural that the mind is going to resist. So, but at a certain point there has to be that surrender. And along with the surrender there has to be some gratitude. So that was displayed by King Ravana. He said, "You have completely destroyed all my arguments, and I am free from all false prestige, from my false arguments. And my false prestige, my discrimination is now clear. So now I understand things, and I want to surrender to you." So that was the result of the mercy of Jadabharata and the proper response by his king. So Prabhupada said that the great souls, they have to tolerate. This is part of the mercy that they give out, that they give. They tolerate difficulties. It's not that people line up to hear the absolute truth spoken by us. In fact, one time some devotees were complaining that it's really hard, people, they're arguing with us, they don't want to listen. And Prabhupada said, so, you have to preach. That is your business. You're a preacher. Don't think that they're going to automatically accept whatever you say. You have to preach to convince them. So, at the same time, people will be sometimes very ruthless. It means we have to expect difficulties. And the examples that Srila Prabhupada gave was Haridas Thakur, Prahlad Maharaj, and Jesus Christ. How all of them were greatly compassionate. They were merciful. They were tolerant. And they tried to enlighten people in God consciousness, but they were harassed, they were beaten, they were killed, or attempts were made to kill them. So this is the nature of preaching, that we have to be extremely tolerant, and we have to desire to give Krishna's mercy. And in that way, we can continue this great Krishna consciousness mission. So that is the symptom of the pure devotee. He doesn't find fault with others, he's tolerant, he's humble. And at the same time, in being tolerant and being humble, if we think that we're humble, then we're not humble. That becomes a problem, We shouldn't think we're tolerant and humble, because if we're thinking like that, then actually we're not. So the more the reverse is true, the more unqualified you feel, then the more qualified you actually are. So if we feel, if we're feeling unqualified, we should be grateful that, oh, maybe I'm making some advancement. And just like I mentioned, Lord Chaitanya's, I'm a fool. And my spiritual master said I'm a fool, and he accepted, by way of example. If we somehow think we've become so learned that we don't have to listen to anyone else, that we perhaps know more than others, immediately Krishna is going to put you in a position. And sometimes it happens quickly. You'll suddenly say, oh, what just happened to me? But sometimes you get in a position of illusion, and you don't realize that you've kind of crossed the line over into the lower realm of consciousness, and you're acting as if you're on a more realized level than you really are. So that's no good. And it's, in the modern world, they'll try to say, low self-esteem. You're the most important person. It's all about you, and you're valuable, and you deserve this, and you deserve that. So they try to pump up the false ego, and they feel like they can't understand the beauty in being a simple person and the beauty of humility. So when we say we're not qualified, it's a fact. Who's qualified in front of Krishna, in front of Srila Prabhupada? But the beauty of feeling unqualified like that is then all transcendental knowledge becomes available to your heart. Or your heart becomes open to the transcendental knowledge. So feeling unqualified is actually a qualification in this regards. I'll take what's the time? I'm looking at the clock, but I can't remember what time I started. So what time is the finishing time?
Yeah, we can have questions.
We have more than
7:30.
7:45 p.m.
Okay, so I wanted to do some Prabhupada pastimes.
Oh, good.
And these are for the most part, the pastimes with Prabhupada's wonderful lady disciples. But I'm going to end with a pastime with Krishna Kshetra Prabhu. But I will tell one wonderful god sister was a little older than most of us when she joined. And she had had a life outside of Krishna consciousness before she joined. She'd been a court stenographer and an executive secretary. So she knew how this process called shorthand. Now I found out nowadays some people have no idea what shorthand is. Does anybody here not know what shorthand is? Yeah. So see, shorthand is a way. It's a type of hieroglyphics, a type of writing where it looks like wiggles and squiggles, but it's actually a way of capturing every single word. It was before tape recorders were born, and she knew that art. So what happened? Srila Prabhupada was coming to Pittsburgh for the first time, and she had gone there to meet him. She wanted to see her guru. She had not seen him before. And many devotees were sitting in the audience with pieces of paper and pens. And Prabhupada looked and he said, no writing. He said, unless you can write every single word just here. Now, if any of you have ever tried taking notes during a lecture, you know you can get some of it, but and then pretty soon you're like 5 sentences behind and you haven't connected what he's saying with what you just tried to write. It's really hard. Just here, that is the process. But he said, unless you can get every single word, and she could do that. So they have these type of notebooks, they're called stenographer notebooks. They flip over from the top. So she took her pen and her notebook, and she was at the back of the room. She made her way forward through all the devotees, the sannyasis, and the brahmacharis, and she sat down right in front of Srila Prabhupada. And he looked at her, and he just began to speak. And she got every single word, because she felt like when Prabhupada said that, he was allowing her this service. So she was very fortunate that she actually could do that. And as a result of that, that whole lecture is somewhere available. I didn't have time to look it up, so that, it was recorded.
Who was the disciple, Mataji?
Her name was Aditya. She lives in Aditya. She lives in Vrindavan now. That's right. And then she was telling about this one wonderful time in Dallas when we had our Gurukul there. And there was a beautiful deity, Radha Kalachandji. And you had this darshan of Radha Kalachandji. Kalachandji is really big. Big black Krishna, beautiful Radharani. I'm attached to them because myself and another girl had the good fortune of purchasing these deities. And when we saw the deities at first, right away the other devotee, Sri Mataji, she goes, "This is perfect for Dallas because he's so big that children will just feel protected." He's a very big deity. So Prabhupada came to Dallas and he came into the temple room. Now, it happened to be that, deities have schedules. There's times when the curtains are open, there's times when they're not open. But it was at that point when any time Prabhupada would come, whatever the time, they would open the curtains for him so he could have darshan. So the curtains were closed and Andrani opened the curtains. So there was Radha Kalachandji, so you were expecting him to say something about the deities, but he said, Nandarani, how are you? And Nandarani just like tears shot out of her eyes, and Aditya was also there, and she also started crying just to see Prabhupada's affection to his wonderful disciples. Another devotee named Ambika, who was from Australia, was asked to cook for Srila Prabhupada at the last minute. Somehow his cook was either didn't make it or was ill. I don't know, whatever the deal, but they asked her to cook. So this is the first time she's seeing her spiritual master, and she's being asked to cook for him. So she did that, and then she was waiting. She made the plate up, and Madhavisa Swami came in and said, "Well, why didn't you take it up to him?" So that was, unexpected, wonderful things. And she brought it up and put it down, and he told her to sit down. And he starts, what is this? He was tasting each thing on the plate. And so then he said, "But who was cooked?" He said, "She cooked." "Oh," he says, "now that she's pleased her spiritual master, she will go to heaven." It was very sweet. And then she went on to Bombay when Srila Prabhupada was there. And she was watching that every afternoon he'd take the 4:30 offering, which is generally fruits, some little things. He was passing it out to the children, which were more or less kind of like street urchins at the time. And some of the kids, they would get their portion and then they'd go back in the line. So the devotees were trying to stop them. And Prabhupada saw that. He goes, "No, let them come. Let them come." And then during the day, she was remembering how during the day, it was very rough there. Like, things, if you've been to Juhu now, it's like, this amazing place. It was amazing then, but it was an amazing jungle. And things weren't built, and it was, really difficult. We didn't have private quarters, private anything. And we're coming from various countries and all trying to live together and do something in this kind of form. Besides being foreign, it was a strange environment, living in a jungle. Now Juhu's all, over developed, and it was a jungle full of mosquitoes and other creatures at that point. So sometimes during the day, there was a lot of friction between the devotees. And Ambika was remembering that in the evenings they would have a darshan with Srila Prabhupada on the roof of one of the buildings there. There were some buildings, but they weren't the devotees' buildings. There were other people living in the buildings at the time. So she would go to these darshans, and she remembers how feeling like in the presence of Prabhupada, you just felt this was Vaikuntha. all the friction of the day, the difficulties of the day melted away. And she felt more than that, she was just looking at the devotees and she was thinking, the same people who just didn't want to see another day, when it came to being there with them in front of Srila Prabhupada, you think, I love these devotees. And everybody was feeling that same affection towards each other, by being in the presence of Srila Prabhupada. And she remembers that in 1977, Srila Prabhupada was in his final days. And so it was his final visit to Bombay, and he was really weak and emaciated. And for one occasion, some member had come into his room, and he kind of was making some remarks about the temple situation. And suddenly Prabhupada, who was just lying there, he couldn't do a lot of things on his own. He had to be assisted. He suddenly just sat up and he said, "So why don't you help these boys and girls? Why don't you help them?" And he started speaking strongly. It was, it was like another person. I mean, it was Prabhupada, but compared to the emaciated sick person that you thought you were seeing, here came this other, aspect of Prabhupada. So for 20 minutes, he spoke like a lion in spite of his frailty, because he was so impassioned to serve the devotees and to serve this Krishna consciousness society of Lord Chaitanya. This is when the mother soul light. Arundhati was married to Pradyumna, who was Srila Prabhupada's Sanskrit editor. And she was doing the transcribing from the tapes that Prabhupada spoke, the Bhagavatam tapes, and then she would transcribe them by typing them out. So when they weren't traveling with Prabhupada, she would stay where it is here or there, and would engage in deity worship or other temple activities. So she was writing, one time she wrote to Prabhupada whether or not she should take on more temple service, more deity service, and then leave her son in the care of some of the other devotees. So she asked Sister Prabhupada, and he wrote back on whether I should take on more service and leave my care, my child in someone else's care. So he wrote back, "I'm simply surprised that you would ask this. Child worship is more important than deity worship. These children are given to us by Krishna. They are Vaishnavas. We must be careful to protect them. They are not ordinary. They are Vaikuntha children. We are very fortunate we can give them a chance to advance further in Krishna consciousness. It's a great responsibility. Do not neglect it. Do not be confused. Your duty is clear." So note that he mentions here that we can give them a chance to advance further in Krishna consciousness. So this means we also have to be Krishna conscious, but it also means that these children coming to us are not ordinary children, that they have been devotees in the past. And it says if one does not finish their devotional service, they will be given the opportunity by being born in a pious family or a family of devotees. So we have to know that the children who come to us are not ordinary children. So we have a great responsibility to see to their Krishna conscious education so that they don't have to come back again and be somebody else's child. But fortunately, in this lifetime, they have become the family of devotees. So this was a very clear and wonderful letter. He wasn't saying, don't do any other service but your primary service. One time, Kirtan was saying about her son, Aniruddha, what's the boy's name? He said, he's intelligent like his father. The Srila Prabhupada said, no, like his mother. She's more intelligent. Another devotee, Ashalata, her name means creeper of hope, and her son fell asleep during darshan through the Prabhupada's lap. And then the darshan was over, so she's like, I don't know what to do, because her son is asleep, he was little. The Prabhupada said, when he wakes up, I'll bring him to you. Told her the husband to go, when he wakes up, I'll bring him to you. And they also had a daughter, and the daughter was a young girl, about 7 or 9, and she wrote a letter to Srila Prabhupada. And Srila Prabhupada wrote back to her, and he said, you and your brother are great devotees. You are fortunate to have devotee parents. I was also fortunate to have a devotee mother and father. When I was young, they gave me Radha and Krishna to worship, and I was performing Ratha Yatra. So, wonderful, wonderful response. And this girl, she is still, and her parents, one brother and her sister, are still practicing Krishna consciousness. And she's a book. She has family herself now, but she distributes books, whole sets of Bhagavatams. That's her specialty. And her daughter, I just read this a couple days ago, her daughter, who's 9, just distributed her first book. and her brother, the one that fell asleep in Prabhupada's lap, is very active in the Toronto Sunday School for Children. So 3 generations of family are all engaged in Krishna service. By Prabhupada's mercy. My godsister Madeira was a young girl when she joined. And she and her boyfriend, they married and then joined, so she was maybe at that time 17, so now she's like 19, and they were in India. And her husband Tejas came up to Srila Prabhupada, and he says, he told Prabhupada he wanted to take sannyas. So Prabhupada said, why? And he points to Madeira. She doesn't do what I tell her to do. So Prabhupada said, well, you have an intelligent wife. If she doesn't do what you tell her to do, then you do what she says. So Madeira said, I felt good about that answer, but neither one happened. He didn't do what I said, and he didn't take sannyas. And then she was also in the Vrindavan, and then serving. And during that time, Radhashyam Sundar, who were the deities at the Krishna Balaram temple, they arrived from Jaipur to Vrindavan. And Srila Prabhupada wanted to take their darshan. So when they were uncovered, Prabhupada looked at Radharani, and then he looked at Jamuna. Jamuna was there also. He says, she looks like you. You've been going to Jaipur. And she was supervising the deities. You've been going to Jaipur, and the carver saw you, and he made her face just like yours. And then they were all laughing. And then Prabhupada looked at Madeira and goes, no, she looks like you. So she was, and this was, such a very sweet, loving exchange. Another god sister, Bhakti Devi. You might have, any of you read that book, Perfect Questions, Perfect Answers? So that was her husband. He met Prabhupada in India when he was with the Peace Corps. She wasn't there, she was back in America. And they had this intense conversation in Mayapur. And from that conversation, 2 things happened. The wonderful book was written, Perfect Questions, Perfect Answers, and he became affected with Krishna consciousness. So she was not so similarly inclined. And the devotees she'd go to the temple just because her husband was going, because she just had no interest. And the devotees would come up and they go, Hare Krishna. And I'd say hi. She would refuse to say Hare Krishna. She just said, if I'm ever going to say it, I'll say it when I'm ready. That was her mood. So after a few years, her husband, Bob, was clearly ready for initiation. She says, but I clearly wasn't. And she still hadn't said Hare Krishna. So her husband was going to go meet Prabhupada, and she felt intimidated, but a good friend of theirs said, "Why didn't you go?" So she agreed to go, and so she admits, I didn't know what I would say, or even if I should go, but she went, and the room at that point was kind of a long, narrow room, and she entered it, and she saw Srila Prabhupada sitting at the end of the room, and they came and they sat down, and she sat opposite Prabhupada. Her husband sat by him, and she said, "I felt like I wanted to blend into the wall." And Prabhupada looked at me, and he said in perfect English, he said, "So, you're interested in Krishna consciousness?" She said, "But I was so bewildered," she said, she couldn't understand what he was saying. And she said, she was totally embarrassed. And she said, Prabhupada knew precisely what was going on, and he turns to her husband, he says, "Translate." I mean, she's an American. English was her first and only language. But sometimes, when you're like in a state of bewilderment, you can't hear what is being said. So, but this was for her a wonderful thing. He said, she felt like it didn't matter what, to Prabhupada, what she didn't understand, and she felt embraced by him. So then a young lady came in with this big bowl of big round sweets. And Prabhupada thanked her and he called Bhakti over and he says, "Hold out your hand." So she held out her left hand, and he says, "No, the other hand." So again, she remembers it wasn't condescending. He didn't say, "No, the other hand," or, just, "No, the other hand," And she felt he was very loving, so she held out her right hand, and he puts this white ball, gritty, wet, think rascula, it was a rascal, into it. And then she's sitting there, she said, "I had no idea what to do with it." And he saw her bewilderment. So he motions, he opens his mouth like, and she's thinking, "How am I going to get this thing in my mouth? It looks so good." But, she did it. And then she said, "My eyes must have bugged out because, Prabhupada burst out laughing." And she washed his hand, and she washed her hand, she was thinking, this is a magical experience. Just then, and then she was thinking, she was thinking, if she wanted to thank him, she was thinking, how can I thank him? She was, she just was feeling such gratitude to the Prabhupada for the way he received her. So she was thinking, she couldn't even concentrate on what he was saying because she wanted to do something to thank him. And suddenly somebody came in and said, "Srila Prabhupada, it's time to go to the airport." So her husband was the one driving him to the airport, so he jumped up and ran out. And, suddenly she's there with Prabhupada and everybody has to leave, so she was standing at the door. So for the first time she was standing like this. And then Prabhupada came by and he stopped and he goes, "Hare Krishna." And he said, he came by and she said, "Oh, thank you very much." And Prabhupada said, "Hare Krishna." And for the first time she said, "Hare Krishna." She said, "I had felt like a square peg in a round hole. I just felt like I didn't fit in, I didn't feel understood. But when I met Prabhupada, everything changed. And he was so loving, he was so welcoming. And I was looking to be acknowledged, and he acknowledged me. And I felt like he was saying, "Yes, there's a place for you here." And he showed me where I could fit in. He says, by Prabhupada's grace, and by Krishna's grace, I'm still here. She's serving in a wonderful capacity in Alachua, Gainesville. After her sons grew up, they went to Gurukul, grew up and entered into different occupations. But she went back to college and she became a certified family marriage counselor. So she gives 50% of her time in service to the devotees, and the rest she uses for family maintenance. Wonderful devotee, and her husband is Brahmatirtha. Anybody familiar with Brahmatirtha? So I'll just, because I'm watching the time. One is it's God Sister of mine, actually, from here in California. So this was in San Francisco, and this girl had had a very unfortunate beginning in life. Just a very, what we call the beginning of dysfunctional families, and now it's kind of normal to have a dysfunctional family, but it was just beginning to be identified. And now it's kind of cool to come from a multiracial background, but in those days it was not too cool. And it was, she had a Hispanic, African American, something else. She was, like a mixed puppy. So she had a hard time in, growing up and with her family situation. And she was always, looking to make sense out of life and looking for someone who knew what life was intended to be. And when she first saw Srila Prabhupada, that bewilderment about life and her place within it changed, because here was a person who was giving knowledge, pure knowledge, in a loving way. And when she first saw him, her first immediate kind of impression was how beautiful he was. And then she thought, well, wait a minute, he's 71 years old. How can he be so beautiful? He must be using makeup. She actually asked me, what kind of makeup does he use? But the last time she saw him, he was, she remembers the devotees were lined up to say goodbye, make their obeisances, and she came, she got a little late, and she saw everybody had flowers, and she didn't have any. And she looked around, she just saw some kind of common flower, and she grabbed one. And she offered it, and he stopped, and he just took the flower, and he just looked at her with what she felt was gratitude. And she was, she said, I didn't give him anything of any value, but somehow he knew that I needed some special attention, and he gave it to me. So, I have two endings. So, first, it's a very wonderful story about a god sister of mine. Her name is Gopakatni. And at a certain point in the 90s, they're both disciples of Srila Prabhupada. But it was the early 90s, they had two kids to feed, and they just, had a hard time making ends meet, so they went back to school. They got, they were floundering, using her words, they were floundering, and Maya pours many coats of the lead to kind of give you a deep coat of illusion. And during that time, she said, we actually gave up chanting, and we weren't associating with, because the school wasn't near any devotees, the one they went to, and they were not hearing and associating with devotees. And then her husband was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. And at a certain point, his kidneys started to fail. So they told him, you have to go on dialysis. And it was going to be like, most of the time he'd be hooked in that machine. And he thought about it, and he turned to her and he said, Gopa, bring me my bead bag and my nectar of devotion. And so she was like, because they haven't discussed, they haven't been practicing Krishna, overtly practicing Krishna consciousness. And so she brought, and he was back in the chanting and reading. And after a few days, he said, take me home, take me out of here. So these people in the hospital, the Rakshasas, are just taking my blood, and I'm not going to get well, because he had an incurable disease. So she went and told the doctors, and they just, they called in more doctors, and there were like 5 doctors standing around her, literally telling her that she was a murderer, and that, how can you do this? And she said, all I could say was, this is what he wants. So they came home, and a week later to that day, he stood up, he sat up in his bed, and he called out, Hare, Hare, Hare. And she realized he's leaving his body. And she immediately turned on a Kirtan. And at the same time, she was like feeling, oh my God, he's leaving his body. But there was, Prabhupada, there was the Kirtan. And, but Prabhupada's mercy, he left his body hearing the sounds of his spiritual master. So she was feeling how kind Srila Prabhupada. He was so kind and so merciful that even though she felt we'd barely done anything for him, he came through in his instructions to tell her husband to chant. So she said that for about the next year and a half, she was kind of absorbed in the process of, having lost her husband and getting her feet back on the ground. And then suddenly she just had an overwhelming realization. Srila Prabhupada came here just to help us. He was so kind and merciful. He gave us Krishna consciousness so we would know how to quit this material world. Krishna consciousness is where it acts. And that's all there is. And she just immediately that same day came to the temple and began serving, practically speaking, full time. She still had some work to do, and then she's retired, full-time service. And she told me, Prabhupada literally pulled me back to his service. And said, ever since then, every day I'm just asking, please let me help you do something, even if it's in my next lifetime, please help, let me do something. And she says, every time I go to Prabhupada, he's telling me, distribute my books. So she goes out on book distribution, she does Pachari work. And she just says, I beg Prabhupada, please let me be a dust particle at your lotus feet. Please let me hang on somehow. This is the wonderful life of devotional service, that we're never abandoned at any stage. Prabhupada has given us a perfect path to follow, and he's given us the perfect mechanism through our ISKCON association society to follow this path. So, Krishna Kshetra Prabhu, you probably don't know, but if you do know, you will know what a wonderful Vaishnava this person is. Very saintly soul. He was a deity worship minister for some time. And he's also got, very learned and knowledgeable in Shastra and all things connected with Krishna consciousness. But he met Srila Prabhupada after he first graduated from college, and he was taking the summer off to tour Europe and see the world for a little bit before he went on to his next college program. You get your first thing, and then you get, so he met the devotees, he read the books, and then he thought, this is something. This is serious. I think I have to go meet these people. I have a little time before I go back to school. I want to spend some time with these people. So quite soon after he arrived, he was in one of the temples in Germany. Prabhupada is coming. And then he was really, looking forward to this, because as a person with a scholarly background, he really appreciate Prabhupada's scholarly work, but more so the transcendental nature of the scholarly work. So after Prabhupada spoke, he asked if there was any questions. And his question was, Prabhupada, how does one develop this desire to get out of this body? So Prabhupada gave a very interesting answer. He said, no desire, no material desire. Simply think how to push on this movement. That desire and no other desire. Anyavilashitam sinyam. No material desire. Sanyam. Make zero all desires. Simply desire. How shall I push on? How shall I serve Krishna? How shall I do this? He continued, therefore, we have given so many engagements to divert the desire. Desire can't be stopped. That's not possible. These foolish persons are saying, become desireless. But that's not possible. Desireless This means I'm dead. No. Purify. Purify your desire. Purify your desire. You have got to desire. You have got desire, then he said, you have got desire for driving motor car? Then drive motor car for preaching Krishna consciousness. At that point, the devotees laughed because Krishna Kshetra happened to be the designated temple driver, in part because he was one of the few devotees that had a valid driver's license. So then Prabhupada continued, so you see, change the quality of the desire. Desire cannot be stopped. That is not possible. I want to eat nice food stuff. All right, eat remnants of food stuff. We offer Krishna's best food. That is the regulative principle. Krishna should be offered the best food, and you take the remnants. Krishna is not so hungry. That is, he is taking, but he's also leaving. That is Krishna's eating. Krishna says, Patram Putram Palam Tayam Yove Bhaktya Prachatate Tadaham Ashnami. Anyone who is offering me these foodstuffs made of Patram Puspam, vegetable and food grains and milk, he never says, give me meat or eggs. No, he never says. He says, Patram Puspam Palam Tayam. These foodstuffs we can nicely prepare in so many ways. And Krishna says, if somebody offers me with faith and love, I eat it. Now the question is, you see, whatever I offered, these things are there. How has Krishna eaten? Therefore, his eating process is different. He has eaten. That you have to learn from the Shastra. That, Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnami Bhavasishate. He is not hungry. Still, he eats the whole world. But still, the whole world remains as it is. That will require some brain to understand. And there was some laughter when he said that. And he said, Krishna eats. Krishna eats and again keeps the whole thing as it is for your eating. So you're not a loser. If you offer to Krishna, Krishna will eat it and he will again get you the food for eating. That is his fullness. So that was a wonderful answer. But his main first part, he gave an instruction. And that instruction was to help push on this movement. So that is something all of us should be concerned with, because that is an instruction intended for every one of the devotees in the Hare Krishna movement. Not that we just come and Hare Bol, take prasada and Hare Bol, but we think, what can I do to repay this wonderful debt? Because we've accepted something, transcendental knowledge from Srila Prabhupada. So in return, we want to express our gratitude. And he's explained how we can do that, is to simply desire how to push on this movement. All of us are here because somebody cared enough to give us the transcendental knowledge, a book, or to speak to us, some prasadam. So we have that obligation to continue the tradition and invite others to take part in Krishna consciousness in the same way. Thank you very much.